I've been chasing the land speed record since the 1960s, so it's definitely dominated my life.
It was one of these things that burns away inside you, and eventually it reaches a point where you've got to do something about it, otherwise you're not really being true to yourself.
It's a man, a dream, a car, and a record.
The world land speed record is probably the ultimate boy's own adventure story. It's now 100 years old, yet in all that time it's only been held by 4 different countries. And the country that has held it for longer than the rest of the world put together is Britain. But it actually all started in France. Once upon a time, there was a Count Gaston de Chasseloup who thought it would be a terrific wheeze to drive his new automobile as fast as he could. He managed a breathtaking 39 miles an hour and began one of the great features of the record, rivalry. For as soon as the Count had set the record, a Belgian, Camille Genatzi, took up the gauntlet for his country. Now, we all think of the world land speed record as a high-tech, glamorous, jet-set affair, but this is a replica of one of Genatzi's first machines, and it's electric. Genatzi's battery-powered special started a 4-year ping-pong game between France and Belgium, which saw the record rise from 39 to a storming 65 miles an hour. An American ended the Franco-Belgian electric monopoly when William K. Vanderbilt took his petrol-powered 9.2-litre Moors to 76 miles an hour. But it was another American who would use it to promote his then little-known car company. Henry Ford drove his 999 racer to 91 miles an hour on a frozen lake. He scared himself silly and only held the record for just over 2 weeks, but learnt an important lesson. Speed sells.
Henry Ford was one of the first people to mass-produce cars, but he was a very sharp guy and saw the land speed record and the accolade of the land speed record as being something that could sell cars. And that was probably the first example of a car being made specifically to break a record for publicity purposes.
Ever since then, it's been Britain and America who have dominated the scene, with just one exception.
And this is it, driven by audacious Frenchman René Thomas. The Delage took the record on July the 6th, 1924, and held it for just 6 days.
It's the 20s, and they are roaring to the sound of the gentleman racer. This was possibly the start of the most glamorous era of the land speed record, when real men in their marvellous machines battled for glory. It was a time for innovative engineering, as the record helped car technology advance at a frightening pace. This gave the cars alarming extra speed, but what mattered most is that they were all beautiful. Malcolm Campbell led the way as 3 great British names fought for supremacy on the beaches of Britain. His fellow combatants, Captain Henry Seagrave and J.G. Parry Thomas.
You had a fascinating contrast. You had Campbell was moneyed, Seagrave was moneyed. Both of them had access to the right sort of equipment. And then you had Parry Thomas, who was a gifted engineer, but just an ordinary guy in the street.
In 3 years, the trio swapped the record between themselves, raising it to 174 miles an hour. But with the glory came tragedy, as Parry Thomas was killed trying to exceed Campbell's new mark. The record had claimed its first fatality, and the British beaches were now deemed to be too dangerous.
Above about 160 miles an hour, Pendine Sands was just not long enough, and the surface was not suitable, so they had to find somewhere else. The answer lay at Daytona Beach on the east coast of the United States, where there was a much longer beach and the weather was much better.
The move to America not only gave the Brits more space, but it also gave them an opportunity to establish a clear set of rules for both sides of the Atlantic.
Europe and America disagreed on timing systems in the early days of the record, and it wasn't until Henry Seagrave in 1927 pulled the two together so that he could go to Daytona Beach that unity was achieved. And this was a significant step forward for the record.
Thomas's death was pretty much the end of the racing car as a record holder. Purpose-built machines took over, and they were monsters. Aerodynamics started to become vital, and wind tunnels were now used to ensure the car wouldn't become a plane. The drivers were superstars. This was the time of the Depression, and there was little else of spectacle that could be witnessed for free. The men were true heroes, making headline news, and huge crowds would turn out at Daytona to watch the record attempts.
It was a time when people were looking for something to excite them, and these were colourful characters. I mean, Malcolm Campbell was a boy's own hero, so was Seagrave, and the cars they drove, the challenges they faced, was something that just captured public imagination in a huge way.
At Daytona, Seagrave quickly took the record beyond 200 miles an hour as the duel continued. Campbell riposted with a more aerodynamic Bluebird, scraping an extra 3 miles an hour, only for America's Ray Keach to inch the record away from the Brits. This, of course, wouldn't do, and so 11 months later, Seagrave brought a new car to Daytona, the Golden Arrow, which blasted its rivals into the sea by adding another 24 miles per hour, earning himself the first motorsporting knighthood for his efforts. America's response ended in tragedy as mechanic Lee Bible took the wheel of the 81-litre white triplex. Turning over at 200 miles an hour, the triplex killed both driver and a cameraman caught in its path to destruction. Seagrave witnessed the tragedy and turned to the water speed record, which he saw as safer. Sadly, he was wrong, and he died on Lake Windermere. The field was then left to Campbell, and in the next 4 years, he too would earn a knighthood as he raised the record by another 45 miles an hour. But this wasn't enough. Despite constantly changing and improving his car, Daytona simply wouldn't let him get what he really wanted, the elusive 300 miles an hour.
In trying to achieve 300 miles an hour, even Daytona Beach is not satisfactory. It is still too short. And the answer was to go all the way west to the Utah Salt Flats, where not only was there more room, but the salt surface gave much better wheel adhesion.
The surface worked perfectly, and Sir Malcolm's supercharged Rolls-Royce Bluebird, with its mighty 2,300 brake horsepower V12, grabbed the magical 300. He had achieved his greatest ambition and retired from the record. Still never satisfied, he turned his attentions to the water and set no less than 4 speed records in 3 years before dying peacefully in his sleep in 1948. Without Campbell and Seagrave, there was a need for new speed heroes. And with the record now above the 300 barrier, they needed new machines, with even more attention paid to the aerodynamics and with even greater power.
Further evolution resulted in the late 1930s in the Railton Special, which is the ultimate, to my mind, aerodynamic shape.
Pitted against John Cobb's Railton Special was the Thunderbolt, driven by Captain George Easton, its 2 new supercharged Rolls-Royces opposing Cobb's trusty 10-year-old Napier Lions. It was quite a contest. In the red corner, Easton's beast weighing in at a hefty 7 tons. In the blue, Cobb's sleek beauty was a relatively lightweight, ice-cooled 3-tonner. Raw power battles great design, and between them the 2 cars take 5 records before the Railton Special wins out, leaving the record at 369 miles an hour in 1939, when the world had something far more important to worry about. The Second World War interrupted proceedings, and it was only Cobb who returned in 1947 to try to break the magical 400-mile-an-hour mark. Unfortunately, lack of tyres and poor weather held him back, though he did set a new record of 396. After that, people seemed to lose interest in breaking world speed records. And it wasn't until the early 60s when a new breed arrived at the Salt Flats. Check my custom machine. Bonneville became home to the hot rodders, young people whose main aim was to drive as fast as they could in their homemade specials. This reawakened interest in the record, and 1960 saw 5 contenders on the Salt. Donald Campbell was the sole British effort, astounding his American opponents by bringing a team of over 80 personnel to run his Bluebird. Against him were the Americans, Athol Graham and Art Arfont, the so-called junkyard genius of the record. Nathan Ostich, the first to run a jet car, and hot rod hero Mickey Thompson, who'd inspire a future legend.
I guess I was in a position in my life where I was a young guy with 3 kids, and I was looking for some way to excel. You know, I wanted to do something that was important. Mickey Thompson actually was a hot rodder from El Monte, built a 4-engine hot rod with 4 Pontiac V8 engines in it, and he was actually taking it out and getting some really respectable speeds out of it. And I think, you know, that was really an inspiration to me. I mean, I actually, you know, could look at what Mickey was doing and think, hey, look, with a little bit more aircraft-oriented technology, I mean, I think, you know, America maybe has a shot at doing this. I used to go through the local war surplus stores on weekends and stuff, and I found a surplus J-47 jet engine. And at the time, I had a sponsor who had a machine company who I convinced to give me $500 to buy this surplus jet engine, and essentially that was the launch of the first Spirit of America.
In Los Angeles, Craig Breedlove unveils the Spirit of America, his jet-powered 3-wheel streamliner designed to go 500 miles an hour or more. Breedlove will attempt to better the late John Cobb's 15-year-old mark of 394 miles an hour and bring home to America the world land speed record, in British hands since 1929. All America is with you, Craig. Good luck.
Once extensive sponsorship was in place, Craig brought the Spirit of America to the flats. It reached 407 miles an hour in August 1963, but having only 3 wheels and being jet-powered, it wasn't recognized as a car by the FIA. It was perhaps just a technicality, but this left the door open for Donald Campbell, after many years and a huge budget, to finally join his father in the record books with the now outdated Proteus Bluebird. 3 months later, the jet age was launched officially with the Wingfoot Express, built by Art's brother Walt Arfons and driven by Tom Green from Elmhurst, Illinois. The record was well and truly back in the hands of America. By allowing jet power, the record was effectively split into 2, one for thrust-powered machines, the other for wheel-driven cars. But it was the jets who would take over, and Art Arfons with his Green Monster took the record to 434, only for Breedlove and his Spirit of America to raise it by another 34 miles an hour just 2 weeks later. But for Craig, it still wasn't enough.
We had set a record at 468, and then I knew I still had more in it, and I was hoping that I could get the record high enough to close Art out for the season, because it meant a lot to the person who had the record through the winter months. The morning that we went out to run, the course was relatively rough that year, and 2 miles out of the starting line, I had one of the clevis bolts in the front suspension broke, which allowed the wheel to camber over, so I was having a difficulty in controlling the car because of it. So, you know, I was able to make it through the lights with the steering in kind of bad shape. I had the steering wheel turned upside down in the cockpit, and I was pretty anxious to get it stopped.
He lost his chute. He lost his chute.
Craig was running out of lake, and so planned to turn the car around. But when you're running this fast with broken suspension, it's just a little tricky.
And then I ended up hitting a telephone pole and hit the embankment about 240, and then went airborne.
A pond cushioned his landing, but he had broken the 500 barrier along with his car.
There was a time there when I was riding in the thing, looking at the welds I had put in the roll bar, and you know, wondering why one puts themselves in this position.
But Craig's big splash wasn't enough. 12 days later, Art Arfons rubbed salt in by going 10 miles an hour faster. Craig's record was as broken as his machine. Over an incredible period of just 14 days, 4 new world records were set. First, Breedlove upped the outright mark to 555 with his new 4-wheel machine. Then Arfont responded with a 576, before Breedlove finally burst through the 600-mile-an-hour mark just 2 days after Bob Summers had set a new wheel-driven record of 409 in his Golden Rod. It was an ingenious piece of engineering. Bill and Bob Summers crammed 4 V8s into a slender tube and sealed America's domination of the record.
Golden Rod was our life, completely our life, my brothers and mine. We would lay there half the night thinking about what we're going to do, how we're going to do this, how we're going to do that. It was a big project, a completely big project. I was a truck driver, and I financed my brother going out and trying to find sponsors, which we finally did.
So after Golden Rod, no temptation to build a jet-engined Golden Rod?
Well, nothing against Craig Breedlove and all the guys with jet cars. They have just as hard a road to hoe as we do, but we felt that the purest was with an automobile engine driving the wheels.
A new decade, a new car, a new engine and a new fuel. America's hold on both records was tightened in 1970 by Blue Flame. It was the record's first rocket running on liquid natural gas.
The Blue Flame is the only rocket-powered car to set a new land speed record. Very few people try with rocket motors because they're much more difficult to use. The fuel is more expensive, it is toxic, it is explosive, and it is very difficult to refuel a rocket motor when it's hot in the 1-hour turnaround time. There are a lot more jet cars than rocket cars, simply because more people know how to use jet engines than know how to use rocket engines. And jet engines are also more readily available. You've virtually got to make your own rocket engine if you're going to build a rocket car.
And so, throughout the 70s, America held both the wheel-driven and unlimited records. People seemed to forget land speed, and for a while it seemed nobody really cared, until a new challenger stepped forward, and he was British. Businessman Richard Noble showed the world he was serious about the record by designing and building his own prototype jet car.
It was something I wanted to achieve in my lifetime. And I rather kidded myself that, you know, if at least I could get to drive to 300 miles an hour on Bonneville, at least I'd had a go, you know.
Thrust 1 ended up on its side, but undeterred, Noble found enough sponsors to carry on, and Thrust 2 was born.
It's a very, very difficult thing to do. It's an absolute nightmare funding it and trying to get it through. And so they say that of every 25 people who actually start, only one actually makes it through to the actual desert to run. This car is very, very stable, and so really what you would do is hold it on the brakes. You then bring the engine up to 92%, and then slam Excel right straight through to max burner. That's the point at which you've got max power, something like 35,000 horsepower. You're driving by a wheel mark, which marks the track, which is 11 foot out from the side of the car, and I seem to drive to an accuracy of something like about 10 to 12 inches accuracy. Your mental processes speed right up, but your heartbeat doesn't. You can see every single detail on the track in front of you come up and go under at 650 miles an hour. And then when you come out of the measured mile, fire the parachute with chute 1. Decelerates very quickly, between 5 and 6G. So you're losing speed at about 130 miles an hour for every second. And what you get is an extraordinary effect called the somatogravic illusion. Your inner air can't cope with this kind of deceleration, and you're absolutely convinced you're driving this car vertically into the ground down a mine shaft. And you just got to basically sit it out from 400 down. We did it for Britain. It was really as simple as that. This was the first time Britain was seen to be sort of coming back after a long, long international decline in just about everything. And then suddenly, we held the world land speed record again.
But for Noble, simply getting the record for Britain wasn't enough. He wanted the unthinkable, the sound barrier.
The name of the game is that once you've actually got a world record, obviously your team is the best in the world, and what you've got to do is all push on together to, you know, to get one more step further if you possibly could. And that had to be the supersonic car.
But where do you begin? Richard went to retired missile designer Ron Ayres.
I started by considering what is the most stable shape I can think of, and decided that with 2 engines we could have a more stable shape than with only 1 engine.
But what about the driver?
Who is going to drive a twin-jet supersonic vehicle? That's what I do as a day job. I could do that. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought somebody like me would be perfectly qualified. And the more I thought about that, I would be perfectly qualified to do it. Now all I have to do is convince Richard Noble of that.
When Richard did Thrust 2, it was old England, sort of the lion roaring again. But Richard's real achievement, I think, will always now be seen as Thrust SSC.
The aim wasn't to set a new land speed record. The aim was to set the ultimate land speed record, the one that nobody can ever repeat, the one that everybody said was impossible, which is to build a supersonic car and to do it safely.
We lent Andy one of the most powerful production cars available just to see how it fares against Thrust SSC.
Try and compare the powers. This is an Aston Martin Vantage. It's a 600 horsepower car. It's one of the most powerful cars you can buy in the UK. Thrust SSC, in order to go supersonic, required and used the equivalent of 100,000 horsepower. So this car is developing less than 1% of the power that Thrust SSC had available to it.
Bonneville couldn't cope, so like Thrust 2, SSC was taken to Nevada.
The Black Rock Desert is a natural surface. It's a dried lake bed, so it's a very, very fine mud surface. Running across that with the car above 700 miles an hour, the airflow, the shock waves underneath the car are so powerful that it is literally ripping up the surface in front of the car. And instead of 4 wheel tracks, we now finish up with one 12-foot wide ploughed strip. And we were actually ploughing something like 12,000 square feet per second of desert as the car is tearing along.
450, looking for 550. 500. Get it back. Pick up the line again, still have it.
Technology and determination have bumped the land speed record upwards in leaps and bounds, but SSC changed the record fundamentally. But remember, the land speed's motto is never satisfied. And for one person, 4 or 5 records just aren't enough.
Craig, this is the Sonic 2, your latest world speed record-breaking attempting car. Tell us a little bit about its construction.
Well, what you see here is the tubular framework for what is my 3rd land speed record effort. It looks like it's good for 800 miles an hour, and the car was completed in '96 when we ran it and actually crashed it, and we did run again in '97 and didn't quite get all the bugs out of it from the crash. So the plan now is to run again in '99 and hopefully get the record with it.
The problem is, anybody that takes part now has to build a supersonic car before even competing. After that, 800, 900, 1,000 miles an hour, you're now looking at up above probably the limits of current technology. And you're also looking at running out of flat areas on the surface of the Earth that are long enough.
Some people will say, what is the meaning for the land speed record? It's got no meaning whatsoever for the man in the street in the car that he drives. But then, neither has climbing mountains got anything to do with ordinary lives. What it does, achievements like that enrich in ordinary lives because it encapsulates the spirit that has made man find new frontiers and conquer them.